Today we replaced the lower control arm bushings on my LandRover Discovery 3 the hard way. Welcome back to my extremely messy garage. I've got a few projects going on right now, including some new airlines going in. But today, I gotta fix my Discovery, or one of my Discoveries. This was the very first one that I bought, the V6 model, and it's making a pretty good clunking sound in the front. So I suspect my front control arm bushings are gone. We're gonna get it up in the air today, have a look, and probably replace those bushings, and maybe do a few other things while we're at it. What was wrong with this thing? Okay, when you hit the brakes, it has a pulsation. My rotors are warped, I know that. But, problem, when you hit the brakes, it would make a constant clunking sound. Really loud clunking sound. It sounded like the whole front end of the truck was falling apart. So I had Susan run it back and forth, slam on the brakes, see if I could determine exactly where that sound was coming from. And what I found was this bushing here, and this one up here, were completely worn, and it was allowing the entire control arm to move back and forth and slam into the subframe. Apparently it's a fairly common issue with these, and my blue Land Rover's doing the same thing, and I have a feeling my white one's probably not far behind. But this is the worst out of all of them, so we're gonna take care of this one first, and while we're at it, I might get the rotors turned, I might not, kind of depends on how I feel and how much time there is, and probably replace that torn boot as well. So, let's get on with it. Let's just dive in. First, remove the CV nut and back off the lower ball joint nut. This nut is left in place to protect the threads from damage when breaking the ball joint free. Next, fight with the lower control arm bolt. While I fight with this bolt, I'll take the opportunity to explain the different control arm bushing repair options. If you have only basic tools, the simplest and most costly solution is to replace the entire arm with a new one. This will get you shiny new bushings and a ball joint. If you have a reciprocating saw, you can replace the bushings with polyurethane, and if you have a press, you can replace them with OEM bushings. That's what we're doing today. I was hoping I'd be done with the bolt by now, but this is a pretty common trend on the LR3. Next, move to the lower control arm eccentric bolts. Note their current position with a paint pen or a marker. This will help keep the wheels in general alignment during reassembly. Or, of course, you could just eyeball it and listen to your tires sing the song of their people as you drive to the line shop later. Once the eccentrics are marked, it's time to try your luck at breaking them free. I won the lottery there, and I was able to remove the bolts without cutting them. There's a good possibility you won't be so lucky, and you'll have to remove them with a reciprocating saw. Place the blade between the bushing and the subframe, and have at it. You can see the amount of rust falling as I push the rear bolt out. Now, don't do what I'm doing. Well, at least in the order I'm doing it. Trying to remove the control arm while fighting against the steering tie rod is stupid. Remove the tie rod first, then remove the control arm from the subframe. Take note of the tie rod removal technique. By striking the knuckle with a hammer, ball joints and tie rod ends can be removed easily without any damage to the joint. This is important if you plan on reusing the parts. Use the same method to pop the ball joint free. Slide the CV axle out of the way and lift the control arm out of the knuckle. Now we get to the messy part. Removing the bushings from the control arm itself. As nice as it would be to just press these out, it just doesn't work that way. At least, not without a press much fancier than my Marketplace special. What we're going to do instead is abuse the crap out of an unsuspecting drill bit. Use the drill bit to remove as much of the rubber from the inside of the bushing as possible. Then, with a large pair of slip joint pliers and a bit of force, twist the center of the bushing out. What you should be left with is the inner cage and the outer bushing shell. An air hammer will make quick work of the cage, but you could also use a hammer and punch here. The outer shell takes a little bit more aggression. Use a reciprocating saw and carefully cut through the shell without cutting too deep and into the suspension arm itself. However, don't be worried if you nick the arm slightly. Once you've made your cut, the shell should slide out without much effort. If you've chosen to replace the bushings with polyurethane, you should be able to press them in by hand and skip this step. If you've chosen to save $5 and instead spend $40 in time like I have, then it's time to press your bushings in place. It was around now that I realized I really need some better press dies, but a few pieces of my lift and this massive chunk of I-beam will have to do for now. The old bushing shell also came in handy to apply pressure to the outer diameter of the bushing and seat it all the way in. With the rear bushing in, it's just a matter of repeating the process on the front bushing. The only difference here is the bushing needs to be suspended above the plate to avoid bottoming out. With the bushings in place, reassembling is as simple as installing everything in the opposite order that it was removed. Place the ball joint back in the knuckle and using a dead blow hammer, tap the control arm back into place. Remember, coat the control arm eccentrics in anti-seize prior to install. It'll make life a lot easier for the alignment tech later. Next, align the lower strut holes and install the bolts. Having a decent pry bar here will make your life much easier. Don't force the bolts in. If the holes are not aligned, you could damage the threads. If reusing the old lock nut, like I am here, it's a good idea to apply a bit of Loctite to the ball joint threads. Blue Loctite would probably be better, but red was all I had on hand. Again, I'm doing things a bit out of order here, and really, the nut should be tightened down at this point. If you were able to reuse your old eccentric nuts and bolts, line up the positioning marks you made and tighten everything down. I recommend loosening these off and retightening them again once the suspension is loaded with the weight of the vehicle. This will help remove any unneeded stress on the bushings and help them last a little bit longer. Now I'm going to do what I should have done already and tighten down the lower ball joint nut. If the ball joint just spins while you're trying to tighten it down, place a pry bar between the knuckle and control arm and apply some pressure to the joint. This should stop it from spinning. Once everything's tightened up, reinstall your wheel and torque it down to spec. Remember, if you're using ugga-duggas to torque your wheels, use a torque stick as well.
Okay, and that wraps up our lower control arm bushings. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do the inner tie rod and boot. They didn't come in time, but we'll pull it back in later and get those done. As you can see, trying to do the factory rubber bushings, you do need some special tools, including a hydraulic press. It took quite a bit of force to get those bushings in. If you don't have a hydraulic press, but you do have a Sawzall or another method of removing the old bushings, Energy Suspension and Atlantic British do make polyurethane bushing kits, which can be pressed in by hand once you get the old ones out. If you don't want to go that route, then easiest way and probably the best way is just replace the entire control arm itself. It comes with the bushings installed, it comes with a brand new ball joint as well. Ball joints in this truck are still okay. They're starting to show a little bit of signs of wear, and down the road we'll probably do them anyways, but for now the bushings were just the main problem. So this job's finished, and until next time, have a good one.